Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on a Saturday morning, a beautiful Saturday morning. This is one of our first Planning 101s that we've reformatted and we're hoping to take out to the public in different ways. Woke up this morning and it wasn't raining. It was a beautiful morning. I thought, oh, I got to come in. But here we are. We're going to do it. It's going to be fun. We have a great project at the end. I would first like to thank Mayor O'Connor's here, Alderwoman Donna Kazemchek's here, Mark Diacampo's here, Mayor's, I forget your title, Mark, not executive assistant. There you go, Executive Assistant for Administration, the Mayor's right-hand man. So first, thanks for coming out. We appreciate that. My name's Joe Adkins. I'm the Planning Director for the City of Frederick. To my side is Gabrielle Collard. She is the Division Manager for Current Planning, which is in charge of the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, keeping everything running smoothly and straight within the City of Frederick. So she has a lot of responsibilities on her hands. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. There's water and cookies over there. Feel free to get up and make yourself available to those. The bathrooms, if you go out, make a left, 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 and they're basically right here. But if you go through the store, you can't come back in. So it's easier just to make the left, left, left than left. So I would like to first turn it over to the mayor and have him give a few welcoming comments, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, Joe. Thank you. One of the things that has been really important to me since I've been in office and then became mayor is how do we engage the community more in the things that we do as a city. And certainly the planning process may be among the most important things we do as a community because it really is our opportunity to address the future that we want Frederick to have. And we really need the community to be involved in that process. We need them to understand the process. Of people who come at it from the outside often are somewhat mystified by the way in which things go from concept to creation and ultimately construction. And this is just a small way for us to shed some light on what it is that we're trying to accomplish as a city to get more of our residents interested and involved in the planning process. We've got big activities that are coming up in the city. We're soon going to be undertaking an update of our comprehensive plan, and that's an important tool for the city. So I appreciate very much the interest in the community being a part of this, and we're going to continue to look for ways that we can engage our residents and keep them plugged into what we're trying to accomplish as a city, because we're elected as elected leaders to do certain things, but the reality is we're just a different version of you, and we can't do it without you being a part of that process as well. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your Saturday to be here.
So the reason for the microphone, one, we're being broadcast live, so keep that in mind, please. And second, it's going to be rebroadcast, and so our AV team wants to make sure that we pick up everything. And if you have questions, please ask them. We'll repeat the questions so the viewing audience can hear it, and we'll move along from that. So don't feel free, just throw up your hand or shout out the question, and we'll be glad to answer it for you. Also, I'd like to thank Lance and Sean back in the AV for coming in on Saturday, too, for broadcasting this live for us. So with all that said, we're going to start. This is really an introduction to planning. It's an introduction to how the planning process works, how the citizens can get involved in the planning process. It's really about what we do and how we do it and why we do it. So it's very elementary in beginning, and we hope to carry this on with other classes when we get past this one and figure out the things we did right, the things we did wrong. So with that, we're going to start. And this is our mission statement. It's on the website, and it's a lot of words, and I'm not going to repeat it. But basically, planning is about creating place, creating community. You know, when you come downtown, you get that sense of community. You know where you are. In my neighborhood, up by TJ High School, Staley Park and North Frederick Elementary is where I think of my sense of community. That's where our focal point is. So we really try to create that sense of place. Even with the new developments that go on, a good example would be Whittier. Whittier has a lake, the storefronts up there. That sort of creates their sense of community, gives them their identity. And we try to do that throughout the planning process. So just to briefly go over, this is the organizational structure of the planning department. first, above me, is the Department of Public Works. I'm part of the Department of Public Works. Within the department, there's the planning department, engineering, operations. Operations are the people that pick up the trash, remove the snow, do all that kind of good stuff, you know, take care of the water and sewer lines, the things that you probably don't think about too often unless there's a problem. And the fourth one is Parks and Recreation. So they're in charge of all the parks throughout the city. So when you have a problem, you call my boss, who's Zach Kirshner, and he comes and talks to me, and then we try to figure out what the issues are. So within the planning department, we have 5 sort of separate sections. We have transportation, historic preservation, development review, which Gabrielle is in charge of, community block grants, which is a HUD program. We get HUD funds to help facilitate affordable housing and other issues relating to the low moderate income. And then we, a new urban design community development section. This is basically our long-range planning, and we're trying to rebrand that into something where we have more focus on creating community, creating community character. So over the next couple months, we hope to, one, finish our comprehensive plan update, and then once we get done that, we're going to start, you know, going out to the communities and try to help them establish what they are and how to enhance that for them. So why plan? And again, just a couple cheesy quotes, but these quotes, you know, are really kind of telling of what planners do, because these, as planners, we do a lot of things for the here and now, but we really try to think 10 years out, 20 years out. You know, Ben Franklin, and you know, it's one of my favorite ones, and it's so true. You know, if you don't have a plan, you're not going to go anywhere. And you know, whether it's life or anything else, I try to teach my kids that, and it just glosses over. Hopefully in 20 years, they'll pick up on it. But so you really have to have a plan, and that's really what we do as a planning department and as a city as a whole. So just a very, you can't see it and I apologize. This is the planning history for Frederick. So, you know, back in 1774, Delaney bought 1,000 acres, and basically it's the old downtown from 7th Street to Bench Street, to South Street over to East Street. The plat is from 1782, and it's kind of hard to see, but I think it's in your packet. There's a map of it. They're long, narrow lots, and basically the downtown looks exactly like this plat. It's amazing. Things haven't changed. Many of the smaller lots, the lots were about 15 to 20 feet wide. People bought 2 or 3 lots, and they made bigger houses on them. So the layout of the city has not changed since 1782, which is really phenomenal. And I think one of the things, as I mentioned before, the character of the city of Frederick and for the county as well is the downtown. It hasn't changed. It has that unique charm that you can't duplicate, you know. Planners like to think, oh, we can write code to make the downtown, make another downtown Frederick. It is very difficult to do. I mean, it's such an organic process that's why we have tourists that come from all over the country, all over the world to see the city of Frederick, because we have something unique that no one else has. So this is kind of an interesting little exercise. The little green dots, and there's not too many of them right now, but if you look in the downtown area, these are the houses that are still standing from 1800 to 1825. There's just a few of them, and this is going to show you the development pattern for the city of Frederick. So you can imagine that everything else was just farmland, but you have a few houses in the downtown. And as you progress to 1850, you can start seeing that there's more houses, and you start going out Patrick Street and going up North Market Street a little bit. And when you get to 1875, you can start seeing the concentration of the housing in the downtown Frederick. The other thing you can see, again, it's a little difficult, there's farmhouses popping up all along the outside of the city of Frederick, or what we know as the city of Frederick today. So at 1875, you really got the downtown pretty well established. And again, the layout, the lots, nothing has really changed since the city was first founded. So we go to 1900, now you can start seeing it, you know, and this is really where the charm of the city is, because all these buildings dating back from that era, you know, it gives the city that unique character that I've been talking about for so long now. But you have it, and then again, you start seeing more farmsteads out and around, out in Whittier. There's a couple on the Wren Farm to the east over by the airport. There's a few green dots that show up as well. Go to 1925. Again, you start going up North Market Street. Uh, I grew up on 14th Street. So the interesting thing about that, a couple of the houses up there, they were old tourist homes, and they had signs out where a single woman typically rented out rooms. And I was always amazed because we had like 6 of them on North Market Street right in front of TJ. So it was really a big thing back then. Moving along to 1950, getting into a little more modern history, you can start seeing the houses over by Fort Detrick filling out. In response to Fort Detrick, that's probably why they started to develop. And then you have the whole east side of US 15, which has not been built yet, start filling out as well. US 15 coming through the city as we know it today, I think it was like 1954, maybe 55. So 15 hasn't been built yet. 1975, okay, now getting into history that I can remember. You can see the downtown completely built out. You can see really the core of the downtown, and we are going south down towards Jefferson Street, down by Mount Olivet Cemetery, that's filling out. So this is really starting to be Frederick as we know it today. And the funny thing is, when I was growing up on 14th Street, we didn't consider ourselves downtown Frederick, okay? We were 14 blocks away from downtown. I mean, you know, it was ungodly amount of distance. So now realtors are marketing basically this whole area as downtown Frederick, you know, to get people interested in buying houses. And so me and my brothers and my sister, we just laughed because we thought, well, we never really thought of ourselves as downtown Frederick, but now we are. So next slide, 2000. Okay, so, you know, you go from 1975 to that, and to that. I mean, oh my God, you know, that's just a lot of houses. We were in a growth boom. I mean, we couldn't sign permits fast enough to get houses built. And this is a direct result of, you know, being between DC, and Baltimore. But surprisingly, just as an interesting fact, only about 30% of our workforce actually goes down the road. But we still had a huge housing boom. Land prices are cheaper up here. You know, so builders came up and people were willing to travel the 45 minutes back then, I guess, and now an hour and a half or whatever it is to get down to DC or Baltimore. But I mean, just, you know, this is my growing up time. This, you know, I remember Frederick as this, and then all of a sudden it turned into this. So it is really quite a transformation. And so again, as planners, you know, we tried to relate communities to each other, try to build connectivity. And this is part of the challenge because we had rapid growth and we didn't have the wherewithal to help do that. You know, the city of Frederick, 2002 did a shared use path that when it's complete, you know, everybody will be within, I think, a quarter mile of a shared use path, a bike path, which would be really phenomenal. I mean, if you could just connect all the different areas of the city with a bike path, it would be really just fantastic. 3-4 years ago, we built the underpass from Schifferstadt over to Waterford Park. I'm amazed every time I drive by it, I see 2 or 3 people either going or coming through it. So we're working on it. You know, our latest project is the East Street Trail program in front of Family Meal, the Monocacy Village Shopping Center. Hopefully we'll get that path built from downtown Frederick going up to what was the old Coke plant. So anyway, that's sort of the development history. Again, this slide always just cracks me up. It's just like, it really strikes home. So moving on, the city does plan. Was a question or no? Okay. The city does plan things. We have a lot of plans, and I'm not going to read all these plans, but we have a lot of plans in the city. You know, every department has a plan. Every, like, the Baker Park, they have their plans. And so we have all these different plans. And so the problem with them is that we got to figure out the priorities and which one, you know, what we're going to work on first. And that's a little difficult. And so Mark has undertaken the strategic plan, which should be done June, July, August, and hopefully give us a little priority of where we want to work on first, what's most important to the city of Frederick. And he's gone out and he's done the public outreach, he had the survey, so hopefully we'll have some clear direction after that. But so we have a lot of plans. It's a matter of, 1, staffing to implement the plans, funding for the plans, and then the political will to make the plans happen. So you have to have all three of those things in line in order to get a good plan going. Let's see, what's next? Planning process. So Gabrielle is going to talk about the planning process, but before we start there, in general, this is the way, the planning process works. We have developers. Back in 1975, when there was hardly anything, until 2000, when all the developments came in, the developers start about 2 years before they submit something to the city of Frederick. You know, they have to do their feasibility studies, they have to do their performers, and all that kind of stuff. So the developers come in, they submit a plan to the planning department. Easy enough. So Gabrielle gets the plans, and this is when her headaches start. So we have all sorts of different codes and regulations. We have the LMC, which is our zoning ordinance. It's the land management code. We have the APFO, which is the adequate public facilities ordinance, the city code, HPC guidelines. I didn't list them all, but we have a lot of different codes that can affect the way a property develops. So from that, we have review agencies. And when I'm talking review agencies, we have Maryland Department of Soil Conservation, we have the engineering department, we have operations to make sure that we can get our trash trucks and our snow plows down streets. We have our parks department, sustainability. So we send out all of these plans to the various departments and review agencies, and they give us back their comments. Easy enough. So we get back a mountain of paper from these agencies. We have it's sometimes 5, 6, depending on the size of the plan, 5 or 6 pages of comments. So what we do then, we give those comments back to the developers. They revise the plan, and this can go back through a couple different iterations depending on how complex the plan is. And then we have citizen input, whether it's through our NAC meetings, whether it's through Planning Commission, or we have a development review conference that the citizens can come in, but we get citizen input. And so after all that, the developer revises the plans again, and then we take it to the various commissions that we have. And these are our commissions that actually make decisions, and they're not review agencies. So we have the Historic Preservation Commission, which is in charge of the downtown. We have the Zoning Board of Appeals, if you want a variance, and Gabrielle will go into these a little bit more detail. We have our Planning Commission, which actually approves plans. And then on some instances, the mayor and board needs to get involved if there's agreements that need to be worked out, if there's variances or things like that. And then during those meetings, the citizens actually get to have their input again, because if you want, you can either come in and voice your concerns at the meeting, you can send emails, you can send letters. We still get letters every once in a while. But, you know, so you still have another opportunity to input on the plan and the development of the plan. Also, when we revise the codes, the LMC, the APFO, the city code, or the guidelines, or any other codes, the citizens have another opportunity to input on what those codes say and whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea. So really, the citizens have input throughout the various parts of the planning process. In this way, we hope to get a better plan that's not only good for the developers, but good for the city and the citizens and the community around those wherever that development's going to happen. So with that, I believe I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle, and she's going to talk about the actual planning process.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. As Joe said, I'm Gabrielle. I am the Division Manager of Current Planning. So working with all of the developers, citizens, everything Joe has covered here with a team of 4 development review planners, as well as the other staff from various departments. So the first thing we're going to kind of jump into is an overview of the whole planning process and where we really start. As you can see from this slide, we really begin with the high-level policy decision-making process of developing our comprehensive plan and amending it. This is kind of that large visioning document, and through this, what looks like a linear process, we hone in and we implement those plans all the way down to the individual property at the building permit level. While this slide is nicely organized like that, the process is not as linear as we would hope it to be, or in a perfect world it might be. It's messier than that, and we move through various stages, and we're amending things, and rezonings are coming in, and annexations. So the process has, it's very integrated, but it's easier to kind of visualize in a linear fashion. So How we've arranged the next set of slides is we're going to begin each series of decision or plan approvals with the agency that has the reviewing authority to approve it. The sign you see on the left is actually our public notice sign that hopefully folks have seen out in the communities. This is the sign that you would see for an item that's getting ready to be brought before the Mayor and Board of Aldermen for approval. The Mayor and Board they do meet twice a month on Thursdays at 7 p.m. at City Hall. They also have workshops on Wednesdays at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all public meetings where public comment is taken. The Mayor and Board, in terms of planning approvals, have the authority to approve the amendments to the comprehensive plan, annexations, rezonings, and then text amendments or changes to our code. The Mayor and Board are elected to office, obviously. The Mayor is the CEO of the city, and the board members are all elected at large, and the elections are held every 4 years, just as a little background. Starting with the comprehensive plan. This is really that big picture visioning document. We established this in accordance with the state mandate to do so. The comp plan includes a land use plan, which establishes generalized land use patterns and also major transportation thoroughfares. So you might see major road improvements shown, not individual street networks, but really those large future roads or future expansions of roads. The comprehensive plan also includes a narrative. So it's not just a land use map, it is broken down into different elements. We have a land use element, a transportation element, a municipal growth, a water resources, a community character and design, a heritage element, an economic development element, a fiscal element, a housing, and a recreation element. And in all of those elements of the comprehensive plan, what we're basically doing is we're establishing policies and then implementation strategies. So these are really broad policy statements about where we see ourselves going in each of these different categories, and then ways we anticipate getting there. The comprehensive plan is probably the most important part of the planning process, because as we work through that linear flow of plans, the whole aim is to implement that plan. So in everything we're doing, I kind of call it the background music, even down to the individual building permit. That is the background music that should be guiding all of our decisions when we adopt the regulations. They need to be rooted in the comprehensive plan and bringing that into fruition. When we make zoning changes, we're basically implementing that comprehensive plan. In my experience, I would say this is the most important process for citizens to get engaged in. It's not the most immediate. It's not the gas station going up across the street or the new 1,500 new homes. It's a little more philosophical, a little higher level. But this is really where people can get engaged to help guide the community. And like I said, ultimately, the development that occurs on the lot next to you or across the street or by your children's school is an outcome of that comprehensive plan and the decisions that were made there. So it's a very, very important process. We are currently operating out of our 2010 comprehensive plan, which we're going to be getting ready to update, which is exciting. As Joe mentioned, Mark and the mayor's office is working on the strategic plan, and I think our comprehensive plan will follow some of the goals and objectives outlined in that. This will be the first strategic plan the city's had, so it'll be an interesting way to start now looking at our comprehensive plan in that light of having a strategic plan and how we help to implement it through that. We'll probably be beginning that effort late summer. And I would take the opportunity, I'm going to put him on the spot. Brandon Mark is our new division manager of comprehensive planning, not current planning. You'd be up here doing this. And he's going to begin with us in June, so he is going to be taking kind of the lead on initiating those efforts. If you attend public meetings in the future on the comp plan, you will probably see Brandon's face. We're very, very excited to have him. This is just a image of the land use plan in the comprehensive plan. You can see it's showing some of the major road connections. It's really kind of amorphous. It's not intended to be a parcel by parcel zoning map. And the land uses that we assign on that land use plan don't always translate into a parcel by parcel zoning. They're generalized categories through which the next step of the process, we look how to add zoning to properties that implement those overall land use goals. The next stop along our journey through planning is the small area plan. A small area plan is basically a subset kind of the comprehensive plan. It's taking that big vision citywide and it's looking at a focused geographic area and kind of establishing similar visions and goals and implementation strategies for at that neighborhood level. It's going to provide guidance in terms of land uses as well as design configurations, and as I said, more on a focused area that has maybe commonalities that we're looking to achieve certain redevelopment or development options. Joe did mention about creating a sense of place. You know, the comprehensive plan is so big, and one of the things I find so amazing about Frederick and what makes it really challenging as a planner to work here is that it's so diverse. We have so many different types of areas in Frederick. We have the downtown core, which Joe talked about. We have very suburban areas like Whittier. We have the Golden Mile, which is a kind of a transitional old commercial corridor. We have East Street, which is an old industrial base. So we have really different areas that deserve different planning approaches and unique looks at them. And this small area planning process gives us the opportunity to kind of focus individually on those. Anything more exciting to add there? This is the East Street East Street Corridor Small Area Planning Area. Say that 10 times fast, which is one of the small area corridor plans we've adopted. It was adopted in August of 2017, and it's basically with the goals of implementing the efforts of our East Street Rising vision plan and to establish a vision for development and redevelopment of that area that, as I said, has been really more industrial in nature. And where do we see that going into the future, and how can it maybe be an expansion of our downtown grid? The East Street Steering Committee meets regularly. After the plan was adopted, the goal is then to start to figure out ways to implement it. So that is a group that is meeting regularly to discuss either regulatory approaches or other initiatives to start implementing that plan. In addition to East Street, the city has also adopted the Golden Mile Small Area Plan. That was in January of 2013. This plan kind of focuses on the modernization and revitalization of that commercial corridor, which is kind of not what we see being the market these days. There definitely is a thriving business community out there, but some of retail is changing. The world is a very fast-changing place, and how do we keep it current and relevant in the new economic landscape? And that Golden Mile Small Area Plan very much focuses too on, it really is just the commercial corridor, so it's also looking at creating those linkages between the residential population and the commercial corridor, which I think is a really interesting challenge. There are other small areas identified in the comprehensive plan for future small area plans. We have the Jefferson Street corridor, the Possumtown and TJ Drive corridor, Rosemont and Fort Detrick area, as well as the US 15 corridor. So those are other areas that the city has kind of identified as being unique to themselves and warranting a small area plan approach. And please stop me if I'm talking too fast, if you have questions, slow me down. The next step we're going to look at is actually twofold. It's two very separate processes. The first, annexation. Just as an overview, annexation is basically the incorporation of lands outside of the municipality into the city, and that is at the request of a petitioner. Why someone would want to do this? People are looking to obtain access to public city services, typically water and sewer, as well as to achieve a higher development potential than they're currently zoned under the county zoning. Through the annexation process, we do establish a zoning on the property, so if it is incorporated, it's also assigned a city zoning classification at that point. Decisions in the annexation process, which I think is pretty fascinating, are really, once again, rooted in that comprehensive plan. The comp plan and the municipal growth element that we have identifies a couple of tiers of growth. The first tier of growth is redevelopment and development of underutilized land in the city. So it's what we have inside our boundaries already. Let's maximize the potential highest and best use of those lands. Afterward, looking at tier one, we look at tier two. And tier two are areas that are outside of the municipal boundaries currently, so they would need to be annexed. But we have initiated planning efforts in terms of water and sewer service for them. They are properties that are within the document that's called the PRWSA, which is our Potomac River Water I always lose it, water supply service agreement with the county. And that is basically an agreement to supply the city with water from the county's Potomac water source, as well as treatment capacity at the new design water treatment plant. So these tier 2 properties we've thought about, we've planned, we know we can, in the future, in implementing that agreement with the county, we can develop, we have the capacity to. And then the last tier of growth is the third tier, and these are basically areas of interest. These we have not planned water and sewer capacity for, but they're kind of placeholders. As I said, the comp plan is mandated by the state. These are kind of placeholders to say, look, these are areas where once we've substantially developed tiers 1 and 2, these are areas that we would be looking to grow. And to a certain extent for the city of Frederick, they are constrained by physical constraints. The interesting question when the mayor and board are considering annexation is, at what point are we ready to grow? And at what point have we worked through those tiers of development? And it's time to say, yes, we need to accept new land to start planning forward for future development. This is the city's greatest opportunity really to negotiate with a petitioner. A lot of annexation agreements result in the acquisition of land for schools or fire stations or large public parks or major public infrastructure improvements that we wouldn't otherwise have the ability to get through our development review process. Once you get into the development review process, the legal standards for establishing the relationship between the development and the exactions, or what we're asking for, become a little tightened. But through the annexation, we really can negotiate a little bit more. The next step is the rezoning. Like I said, this is kind of a separate, it's not necessarily always associated with an annexation because you are receiving your zoning with your annexation, but the next major land use decision in our kind of linear process is rezonings. There are, and we should have mentioned it, but in your folder we do have a glossary, and there are a lot of terms in here that I'll use that if you've never heard them or you want to take some time to mull them over a little more, please refer to that. In the city, we have several types of zoning districts. In 2005, when the city adopted our comprehensive rezoning map after adopting our land management code, we established a base zone, which established Euclidean zoning districts. These are our standard low density, medium density, high density residential, neighborhood commercial, general commercial, light industrial, heavy industrial zoning districts. There's some others. I'm sorry. The question was, which year was the comprehensive rezoning that we're currently operating under? That was 2005. So but prior to 2005, we were operating out of our 1986 zoning ordinance. And it was a different ordinance, different zoning map, different set of zoning designations. We also then kind of simultaneously adopted a base and zoning, floating and overlay zoning map. So we have essentially two maps. The floating and overlay zoning map established certain floating zones, which are a zoning classification that can be placed on a property at the request of a developer for a specific land use. The key example, institutional, is a floating zone. And an applicant can come in and maybe they want to build a place of worship. And they can asked to have that floating zone placed anywhere in the city on any property subject to compliance with the criteria for that land use and the mayor and board's approval. So those are floating zones. You kind of picture them like floating up above the whole zoning map. They can be pulled down onto a piece of property at the request of a petitioner, and they basically replace that base zoning district. So none of the principles of that base zone exist anymore. That's different from an overlay zone. An example of an overlay zone is our historic preservation overlay. And that applies in addition to that base zoning. So we have a historic preservation overlay, we have a highway noise overlay, an airport overlay. So if you have one of those overlays on you, you comply with both the general zoning criteria as well as the, I call it a bonus zoning district. I don't know if everyone looks at it that way, but your bonus regulations. And those are aimed to achieve a specific function. For example, the airport overlay district. That's applied to properties surrounding the airport, and it's to notify potential developers, potential purchasers of homes, that you are within proximity of the airport. There are certain effects that noise, flyover traffic that you can expect to encounter because you're in that overlay. And then there are regulations associated with how construction can occur so as to not interfere and conflict with operations at the airport. Yes?
Regarding the overlay, I know one individual is off the top of my head who actually defeated an overlay by the city of Frederick, I guess. But has been your experience that the overlays decrease the property value, or at least the assessed value, or do they help it somehow?
In some instances, the historic preservation overlay, I think is a great example because
You're limiting the freedom with what somebody can do with their property. That's my concern.
I don't know that I have any evidence to speak of with regards to the economic impacts directly. I think to a certain extent, though, they are offered also as protections. For example, the highway noise overlay, we associate that with highways where you might have noise-impacted residential uses. And we say, look, we're going to keep single-family units out of that area because it could have detrimental impacts on a single-family dwelling unit. It could reduce your property values if you put a home here, and it conflicts with the loud noise of 15. So they really are intended to offer protections based on the context that they're in. I think the historic preservation overlay.
Protection for the property owner, protection for the HBC, or protection for
It depends. I think depends which district you're talking about. Obviously, if in the historic preservation overlay, the intent is to protect the historic district, and the land values benefit from that protection. For the city overall. Does it create an individual property owner an added constraint? Yes, you have to come, and we'll talk a little bit about the historic preservation process. You have to maybe ask for a different approval or file a different permit. So on the individual property owner, there may be additional requirements, but I think for the city as a whole, it's the intent to.
my mother lives right across the street, and
Yeah.
When she goes, I was thinking that it wouldn't create a giant water slide or something, but I don't think it's gonna be possible. But okay, thank you.
Sure. In terms of protecting property values and conflicting land uses, the base zoning is really what is probably most important, because the overlays don't, by and large, establish use restrictions. They focus maybe on design or setbacks or those sorts of things. Your base zoning is what's establishing what uses are allowed in what districts. So with those decisions, as an individual property owner, as a homeowner, if we zone a property next to you differently, it's going to change what could go there, and that would that's where those compatibility decisions are really important. I don't know. I don't know that yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. So we have those three different base, floating, and overlay zoning districts that all might be impacting a property. Once again, kind of like with the comprehensive plan, zoning is super important. It is when we are establishing what land uses can be on a piece of property. One of the criticisms or concerns I hear a lot with working with the public through our process is people often feel like when we get to a site plan stage that there was no opportunity to comment on the compatibility of the land use. And to a certain extent, they're right. Once you have the zoning attached to a property, you have given it a bundle of rights. You have established what land uses are going to be allowed there and the development patterns, setbacks, building heights, all of those things. So this is a really, really important step, and the Board of Appeals, the Planning Commission, as staff, we all need to be very cognizant of what that really means. When we've assigned this zoning, what does that do? What are the implications? So that's another place as a member of the public you would very much want to be engaged in. Yes, yes, ma'am. We generally don't. The private legal constraints are. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah. The lady asked how far, when we're making zoning decisions, how much research we do into any covenants that may be on properties, and that really is not a public matter. Our zoning decisions are rooted in compatibility with the comprehensive plan, and I'm going to talk in a second about some of the criteria for rezoning. In terms of private covenants, that is a private matter for the most part.
Just to add on to what Gabrielle was saying, the rezonings are really important because, if your next door neighbor goes from a residential to a commercial use, that may be a good thing, may be a bad thing. Another important aspect is we were talking about when we talk about text amendments, where you change a zoning's use. Like if you have downtown residential and all of a sudden you decide to allow, and it will never happen, but you allow gas stations there. The text amendment changes that use, what uses are permitted in that zone. So when you see in the newspaper us talking about a text amendment and we're changing a zoning classification, that could be just as important as well. I mean, so really the public process, as Gabrielle mentioned in the first 3 slides up there, the comprehensive plan, the small area plan, the rezoning annexations, those are where you really want to have, where your input affects the most, And once when you get down towards the site plan, you're really working out the fine details, but text amendments are another area you want to pay attention to as well.
Yes, yes.
What's the difference between like an institutional overlay and then like the HPC overlay? Because like I'm thinking like St. John's,
Mm-hmm.
the school.
Yes.
The institutional overlay.
Yes. The question is, what's the difference between the institutional, and it's actually a floating zone, and the historic, so that's where one of the key differences really comes in, and like the historic preservation overlay. So a floating zone is applied and basically eliminates the base zoning district. It becomes the guiding principle. It is, kind of that alien that has taken over the brain of the zoning district, and then that is what's guiding all of the development. So when the institutional, and that's applied to properties for places of worship, maybe government offices or installations, schools, institutional uses, colleges have that floating zone. And it's a flexible floating zone that allows for the Planning Commission through the review process to make certain accommodations for, maybe campus-wide settings, things that don't neatly fit into a standard zoning district with certain setbacks and heights and those sorts of things. So it's a little more flexible, but in that flexibility also comes more responsibility. It's kind of like raising children, probably. We give added flexibility, but then at the same time, the applicants are subject to certain design standards. So while the Planning Commission might not have certain setbacks that they're reviewing for or building heights, there are other criteria like architectural design provisions that is a higher standard. So that's the institutional. The overlays, and the historic preservation being one of them, those add a second set of regulations to the base zoning district. So you're still subject to all of your base zoning requirements. So you say your zone DB, which is our downtown commercial residential. That zoning district is telling us what land uses are allowed there and what general building setbacks and heights are allowed and density of development. But then the overlay, second bonus set of regulations, that requires compliance and consistency with the historic preservation guidelines. So you have to basically feed both mouths. You have to comply with not only your base zone, but your overlay zoning parameters too. Whereas the floating zones, that's your new zone, whatever is applied.
That doesn't make sense, but I remember what St. John's went through, they said that was off, and then the R was underneath of that.
Right, so then when we pull that floating zone off, it reverts back to, it reverts back to the base zone, because I said in 2005, we adopted 2 maps, basically. We adopted this base zoning map, and then we turned around and immediately adopted this floating and overlay zoning map. So when you take a floating zone off, it's gonna revert back to the base zone that we established at 2005. So it went back to R16 or 12 or, right. So how we get through those rezonings, and then there are a couple of types of rezonings. We have our comprehensive rezoning process, which is when we look at the city as a whole, following a comprehensive plan update, and we say, okay, what kind of major land use decisions did we make how do we need to make changes in our land use and our zoning to implement those? So you might see wholesale areas that the comp plan said, you know what, we should start to see this area be more mixed use. And so then on the comprehensive rezoning, we look and say, okay, what adjustments do we need to make to bring that to fruition? So it's a really overall look at the entire city. If you want to change your base zoning outside of that comprehensive planning or comprehensive rezoning process, it becomes very challenging. There's a very high legal standard because what did we just do? We just went through that whole comprehensive plan where we said, you know, this is where we want to go and this is how we're going to implement it. So now if you want to change something outside of that process, you better have a darn good reason because we're going to give the presumption that that was the right decision for that property. So in the state of Maryland, the legal standard is, and you may hear this, is change or mistake. So you have to prove that either there was a substantial change in the character of the community that wasn't anticipated, that the mayor and board never saw coming, that now warrants you to have a different zoning on your property. I give it just, you know, big changes that you would never think of. I think of, what if Fort Detrick went away one day? You know, we maybe made a lot of decisions knowing that Fort Detrick was what it was, and that was a guiding principle in our mind. Now what if it disappeared? You know, that would be a huge community change that might warrant making some different zoning decisions for properties surrounding it, or even the property itself. The other criteria is mistake. And that requires an applicant to demonstrate that there was information missing or wrong information that the board based their decision on in that first rezoning. So there was something you didn't know, there was this, you know, red herring that nobody brought up, that the mayor and board did not have the privilege of knowing, that led them to believe, to zone it one way when that wasn't correct. That's a lot of mumbo jumbo. Basically, the takeaway from that is it's a very high legal standard. And even if you document that there's been this change or there's been this mistake in my zoning and I should be different, it's an allowance. There's nothing that compels the mayor and board to rezone an individual property outside of that comprehensive process. The floating and the overlay zones are different. So if you want to add a floating zone outside of the comprehensive rezoning or remove a floating zone, that can be brought forward as a separate application. There's not that same legal standard. The overlays to expand an overlay or to add an overlay also does not have that same high standard, but you have to document compliance with the requirements for that district, what you're asking for. You need to demonstrate that this property, if it's an HPO, that this is a historically significant property that we want to add the historic preservation overlay to implement the goals and objectives. So those are the kinds of rezonings that you might see going through the mayor and board at some point. Next group of plans we're going to move on to, or decisions, are those that are made by our planning commission, and that's the blue signs you'll see out around the city with the big P on them. The Planning Commission, in addition to having review authority for a lot of things, also is a recommending body. So all of those applications we just discussed, the Planning Commission weighs in on and makes a recommendation to the mayor and board. It's important to keep in mind because if there are ever applications that you see an annexation or a rezoning, that means more opportunities to be engaged in the process. It means that you can come to public Planning Commission meetings and weigh in or add comment, and then also up to the mayor and board. In terms of what the Planning Commission has the final say over, they approve master plans, preliminary and final plats, site plans, as well as modification requests. I would add to that, to Joe's point about text amendments when we're changing the code, the Planning Commission also weighs in on those decisions. The PC is made up of 5 voting members and 1 alternate. One of the regular voting members is one of our aldermen, and that is Alderman Russell at this point. She's been with the Planning Commission for a while, has a lot of great experience in it. Members are appointed by the mayor and board for a period of 5 years. It's actually one of our longer terms to serve on one of our commissions. And I was thinking about actually when we were putting together this slide, and I was like, that's interesting. It's Zoning Board of Appeals, HPC, they're shorter periods of time. And thought to myself, I wonder what the point of that was. And I think it's interesting because a lot of these plans take a long time to develop. And 5 years, you're gonna see maybe something start and you might not even see it finish. Now, you know, it moves at a fairly slow pace. So I think maybe that is some of the reasoning behind that longer term. It gives people the ability to 3 years you would figure out what you're doing, and then it, you'd be out. So I thought that was interesting. We do meet 3 times a month with the Planning Commission. We have a hearing that's the second Monday of every month, and that's here at 6 p.m. We have a workshop that is the third Monday of every month, and that is over at our annex building. In the workshops, we've made some changes over the past couple of years to allow for public comment, which I think has been a really great change. We used to just have a dialogue between the Planning Commission staff and the applicant, and a lot of times people would attend and they'd sit there and kind of frustrated because they want to be part of this process, but they would have to be quiet. So we now take public comment, and that's a great thing because it gives, sometimes it alerts staff to things that we weren't aware of. The Planning Commission might say, oh, well, the next door neighbor knows something we don't know. And that in that stage of the process, there's still time to work through it and to try to see what changes could be made or what other information might be needed. And then we do have a pre-Planning Commission meeting, which is the first Friday of the month in advance of our Planning Commission hearing. The workshops are, we kind of use them twofold. We use them for items that are ready to move to the Planning Commission the following month. So if you look at our workshop agenda and you see something that you're interested in, it's probably going to move forward to the next month's hearing. But we also use it for informational sessions. Sometimes we have reviewed a plan and the staff and the applicants have huge disagreements on something. We can't come to terms. We've kind of worked through it and we go, you know what? We should get it out into the public, to the Planning Commission, and let them start weighing in on it. So that we have that kind of early engagement with them as well, which is really beneficial. So the first plan that the Planning Commission looks at is our master plans. So master plans are not required for all types of developments, only certain scenarios, and these are basically our flexible development techniques. These terms are all referenced in your glossary, so if you want to look further at them. The master planning process is applied to planned neighborhood developments, traditional neighborhood developments, age-restricted community developments, mixed employment developments, and MU1 and MU2, which are mixed-use districts. So I'll quickly just kind of touch on what those are. A P&D basically allows for flexibility in design standards like our minimum lot sizes, setbacks, even street design standards. And this is really to create an integrated and creative design to incorporate a variety of different types of housing types. So you may be zoned R4, which is low density, and otherwise wouldn't allow for townhouses. But through the P&D provision, your density is still based on your zoning category, but you might be able to incorporate towns or multifamily or a different type of development pattern. P&Ds are predominantly residential, although we do allow for some integration of some neighborhood serving retail. So you wouldn't see the Wegmans in the middle of a P&D, but you might see smaller, you know, a dry cleaner and, you know, cafe kind of thing. T&Ds generally apply. We don't actually have any T&Ds in the city. T&Ds are much larger tracts of land, and that's a traditional neighborhood design. You can think about kind of villages of Urbana, where you're establishing a community center with surrounding neighborhood sub-areas with open spaces and public spaces that are all kind of connected by a pedestrian and vehicular network. So it's a larger scale, and it may integrate other kind of civic and commercial uses that you wouldn't see in a P&D. The ARCD, which is our age-restricted community development, is actually kind of a new tool, and this is to create an integrated age-restricted community that is oriented towards retirement activities, highly amenitized types of areas. MXC is a mixed employment. The example of this is Riverside Corporate Park, if you're familiar with that area. And that is basically to create large, light industrial developments with a compatible mixture of commercial, employment, recreational, and actually we do allow for some residential incorporation into the MXC. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about as we move forward. You know, I think at one point when I read that the regulations for the MXCs, you know, it's very, well, not this much residential, but not that much, and only this type, and it's kind of holding back on that residential integration. But, you know, the direction I feel we're moving as a community is really to integrate land uses. We're all tired of being in our cars. We all want things to be pedestrian oriented. We want to live by our jobs and have services in that same area. So moving forward into our comprehensive planning efforts and to comprehensive rezonings, I questioned to myself, how will we change some of this to create kind of that more integrated environment? But like I said, MXCs right now are much more light industrial oriented. And then lastly, mixed use. So we have two versions of mixed use. We have a base version, the base zoning that we apply as part of our comprehensive rezoning process. And then we have a floating version of it where someone can ask to pull it down on a piece of property subject to a master plan approval. The mixed use is going to allow for really compact pedestrian neighborhoods, as well as a mix of residential and non-residential. The mixed use provisions could result in a development that's really heavy non-residential with lesser residential, or vice versa. It's an 18 or 1585 mix that a developer has to achieve, but it could be one way or the other. An example of mixed-use development, Market Square was developed under our mixed-use provisions, and that's been kind of an interesting learning opportunity. I'm sure many of you frequent what's up there, Home Goods is there. And while it was developed in accordance with the mixed-use regulations and it meets all the standards, I think when you visit that place, you feel that the residential and the non-residential are very segregated, that we're not seeing kind of that vertical mixed use like you see downtown. You have all of your shopping center and then all of your residential adjacent to it. So one of the things that we constantly have been asking ourselves is, how do we look at our regulations and adjust them if we want to create more of that vertical integration and more closely integrated uses. But I think that's still a good example of a walkable environment that has a lot of services right there. So it does meet some of those overall goals.
What zoning is that?
That is mixed use. Mm-hmm. That is mixed use 1. Yes, that was MU1. That was actually assigned that zone in 2005. So this is an example of a master plan that you see here. It is a very conceptualized land use plan. Once again, kind of like our comprehensive plan, we're establishing general, we call them bubble plans. We're establishing general land use areas and then major road connections. You're not looking down at individual property levels. You're not looking at the street network yet. You're really just kind of saying, this is going to be open space. This will be high density residential. These are where pedestrian connections will be made, vehicular connections. It's very generalized. We also establish densities, that this will be the high density core. From here we'll move out to a lower density, maybe a mixture of towns and singles. And so you establish kind of those general land use feel. The master plan is also the first time that we look at our adequate public facilities ordinance in the process. So up until now, even with an annexation, while we think about what public facilities will be serving, there's not really an adequate public facilities test done until you get into the master plan process. And then we start looking at the capacity of our schools, our water and sewer services, our roads, and what's that? That's it, water, yeah, I'm like, why, I got 4 of them. Water and sewer separate. And we have tests to determine adequacy. And so this, if you're beginning your development process in the master plan, this is the first step where you would do that actual testing. We also start to do kind of environmental assessments at this point. So we look at our forest stands and yeah, did you have a question? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it depends what facility you fail. So through, we can look at roads and schools are usually the most exciting and the sexy ones. For schools, for example, we work with Frederick County Public Schools to determine, based on the housing types and the number of units, they identify pupil generation yields and how many kids will come out of this neighborhood. If the schools that serve that neighborhood are over capacity, there are a couple of options. You can wait for 3 years and fail the test 3 years, and then we allow you to move forward. And at any level, all you have to do is either pass one or fail for 3 years, elementary, middle, and high, and then you can move forward. If the school is under 120% of the state-rated capacity for that school, there's an option to pay a fee and move forward. There's a school construction fee that you can pay. And then there's also an option, and nobody's ever exercised it. There's an option to propose a mitigation. So you could say, I'm going to build you a new wing or build you a new school, and you could propose a mitigation that goes through the Board of Education and things. With roads, we look at different intersections and how the development will impact those. If those intersections are failing, the developer has to propose mitigation. So they say, we're going to put a signal there, we're going to extend that left turn lane, whatever it might be. Our city engineer looks at that and says, yes, that will bring that intersection into compliance and make it adequate. And then as part of the development process, they have to either construct it at the beginning before we would issue any building permits, or they can enter into what's called the mitigation agreement with the mayor and board, and that allows them to propose the timing of that improvement somewhere through their development plan. So maybe they don't build that intersection before the 200th permit's issued. And so that's a negotiation with the mayor and board. Yes, sir.
I know this is gonna sound like a dumb question, but
No dumb
is
questions.
there any type of automatic process where if a plan has not been reviewed, say 10 years, for lack of a better term, an ops I would call like a tickler file or something, that mandates that it gets looked at and signed off on, that it's been considered? In other words, if some smaller plan gets filed away, and let's say, this is 2019, 2029 or something comes around, is there anything that forces city officials
To approve it because
to just look at it and review it, maybe once every 5 or 10 years, just so, you know, the public knows that somebody has glanced at it?
there isn't, there are expiration dates. The question is, you know, kind of, I guess, what keeps a project moving through a process and kind of keeps it current if it.
Just a general oversight, or does it only get reviewed when someone complains or something?
So once, you know, if you're like looking at a site plan level, it's simple. You know, if a site plan gets approved, you're building a new grocery store and you're gonna put in your parking lot and your trees and your lighting and all that good stuff. So the site plan gets approved. It's gonna work its way through our process. It's gonna go through improvement plans, which are construction drawings. It's gonna go through a building permit. We're at all of those steps, there are inspection processes that occur to make sure that the improvements that are shown on that plan actually get built. So then we issue your building permit, you build your thing, inspectors come out, inspect it, say, yes, it's built according to all the plans. From there on out, if trees start to die, if the dumpster gets moved, there is a site plan enforcement agreement that is executed when we do the site plan approval that requires a developer to maintain everything like that was shown on that plan. So we don't conduct routine inspections of every site in the city, but if I get a call and someone says, oh, the trees have all died on this site, we have the enforcement mechanism to go back and say, you need to put those trees in because they were part of your plan approval. If it absolutely, and you know, to that extent too, you know, if somebody wants to revise something, they have to come back through the plan. You know, you built the 5,000 square foot, you know, box building, and you want to redo your parking, and those all require revisions to that plan as well. So, it's more of a, you know, it's.
But in case of accidental negligence, there's nothing that forces something to get looked at every 10 years or every 5 years.
We don't have like a routine inspection.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for all this information.
You're welcome.
When I think about planning, I think like there's this immediate thing, what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, and then I think like, what do I want this city to look like in 100 years for my grandchildren? So you have the APFO, but that seems like it's just like a check for like the next 5 or 10 years. What do you do to kind of think about projecting what the city will look like in 100 years, and is that what I want my city to look like in 100 years?
So that's back to that comprehensive planning process when we really take that long look out. As I mentioned, even with our tiered growth, you know, we've established this municipal growth element in our comp plan where we've said, look, we need to know if we're going to be able to provide services, water and sewer, roads, those sorts of things to these areas. So when we make decisions about annexation and we're implementing our comprehensive plan, we should be mindful about what services are going to be required to provide service, you know, what kind of impacts it's going to have on water and sewer and roads. The decisions, though, are much more general at that point versus at the APFO, where we really get down to looking at the intersection and looking at, you know, this specific use. For example, not to go into gory details, but, you know, with roads APFO test. There's an ITE manual. It's a trip generation manual by the International Transportation Engineers folks, I don't know, some smart people somewhere. And each use has certain trip generation averages that are associated with it. We look at the square footage. We assume a certain number. So you really need that specific use at that time to go, oh, that thing is going to produce this many peak hour trips. There are going to be 20 cars between, you know, the morning peak hour trips coming from this use. So you really, to then apply that data to the current transportation network and how things are currently operating to get down to that fine level of going, okay, yeah, you need to extend that left turn lane. So it's much more focused. But like I said, at that big picture level, we should be thinking about all of that. Yes, sir.
Taking that same question in reverse.
Okay.
Because you have such a historical context of 200 some years of doing this,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a good example of something you look back 50 years and said, we now in hindsight can look back and see that the decision that was made to do X 50 years ago, we shouldn't have done it that way, should have done it this way. Do you have that historical perspective in your work from the past?
I mean, generally, I think we're always learning from the decisions that have been made. I think the greatest challenge in planning, period, is understanding all of the conditions that are occurring at that time. You know, I think about some of the things that are on the horizon that we have to start planning for, autonomous vehicles and changes to, you know, Amazons of the world, and what's that doing to our retail. So the world 50 years ago, while we can go back and look and go, oh, we should have done that differently, the set of conditions that we're trying to operate under today are so different. And it's exciting and it's really interesting to think about. So while there are lessons to be learned, I'm always conscious of making sure we're looking at them in today's context. It feels like the world's changing more rapidly than ever now. So, yes, ma'am. Oh, thank you.
Is it on? Adding on to what's just been said,
Is that on?
if there were additions in the, oh, I asked if it was on. Is it on?
Hello, hello.
Okay. It's on. All right. Adding
Yell.
on to, yeah, I'm not going to yell at it. Feedback, be terrible. Adding on to your comment, with plans or, you know, intentions that get into a comprehensive plan, say 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I know because my dad was in road construction. He was a civil engineer. He told me about the Frederick Beltway being in the comprehensive plan 50 years ago. He was on the crew that built Route 70 when it came out here as 70. He was on the crew that built that great big exchange that is the bridge to nowhere at the west side of the Baltimore Beltway where 70 takes off to come out here. I have some of his old Polaroids from that job when that stack of bridge pieces was there and nothing else. But he says, you know, the Frederick Beltway was on the plans. It was in the plans 50 years ago. So what checks and balances might be in the system to deal with intentions that are put there? They know, you know, we're going to need this, that don't happen. I know we have to follow the money, but how far does the responsibility to carry out that comprehensive plan go?
That's a great question. And the first step, I think the interchange, Tim Davis is our transportation planner, and I think the potential future interchange at 26 and Monocacy Boulevard, we have to put those we have to state our intent loud and clear on the comprehensive plan. And once again, the importance of the comprehensive plan. If we want to see something in 50 years, we need to put it on that plan, because that, when it gets to my stage of development review processes, I pull my comprehensive plan out and I go, you want to annex this property, you want to develop that property, guess what? That's where new interchange is. And then that, like I said, that becomes our opportunities to start getting those improvements. And it's piecemealed. You know, a property comes through and, oh, you've got a portion of, unless they're part of our capital improvement program, our city publicly funded infrastructure plans. Otherwise, these things have to be on that comp plan in order for us to carry them out and to start getting them.
Here's stuff that was in the plan, it didn't happen.
But we're still trying to make effort. Yeah, I mean, we annexed the Wren property, and one of the connections, the Wren property out Gas House Pike, and one of the future alignments of Big Road in Frederick is through that property. So we're saying, look, you need to, in your development application, you need to create an avenue for this or not preclude it, and maybe it's changed a bit. Maybe the nature of it, what was anticipated 50 years ago, is a little bit different, and so we need to reassess it now. But it's a slow process to carry out some of those really large improvements. Yes, Rachel.
Hi, thank you very much. My second question is about like hip new trends. Like you mentioned autonomous vehicles, and I think about a retiring community and an aging society, and I think about intergenerational communities. What are some other planning trends or hip things or things we just had to be considerate or mindful of when we're thinking ahead?
Sure, it's such a cool. I think it's a fascinating, kind of scary world we live in, but it's fascinating still. I think a lot of the things I'm hearing, a lot of housing options. Affordability is huge. It's not cheap to live anywhere. So how can we be creative? What sort of housing needs are people looking for? You mentioned intergenerational. ADDUs, accessory detached dwelling units, tiny houses, co-housing opportunities. All of those things are opportunities for us to make progress, I think, in terms of achieving affordable housing. And so I think that's a biggie. I'm not a millennial, I'm out of it, but everybody tells me about the millennials. And, buying a single family home is not the American dream to some of those. They want more flexibility, more fluidity, co-housing interests, people, living together. I always think about how neat it would be for an aging population to have places, not a retirement home, but have a house with individuals, older people, that have shared common spaces, but individual private spaces living as a community. I think that's socially, I think that's an amazing thing. So I think the housing options, I call it my dorm I want to live in when I get old. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that is totally, I'm like, that's what I want when I'm old. Dorothy's already with me.
Hey, Gabrielle,
Yeah.
we got one more question, then we're gonna have to move on in
yeah.
respect of time. Okay, just
We could talk planning for days.
Yeah. So, outside of what's already in this glossary, what is capital improvements program, and can you give me an example of that?
So that's a wonderful question, and also really important. So the CIP is adopted as part of the budget, and that basically establishes all of our public infrastructure improvements that we're going to give money to. Roads, sidewalk retrofit, the police station, and it's over a 5-year period. So it's not always assigning funding that year in the budget, but maybe it's scouting out funding for future years, because we only allocate money for a year at a time with the adoption of the budget. The CIP, once again, should be rooted in the comprehensive plan. That should be helping to guide our decisions about what infrastructure we as the city want to take our taxpayer money and build improvements to. The Planning Commission does weigh in on the CIP. They provide a recommendation to the mayor and board, as well as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee weighs in on pedestrian and other vehicular improvements. So that is very interesting. It sounds dorky, but it's actually kind of interesting to look through to give you an idea where we'll be spending our money. All right.
Question, when the city want to annex a Wren farm, for example, which is the example you brought up responsibility with turn to Bellway, what happens when, say, the
any easements would still be observed. So we could annex a piece of property, but if they have a commitment to the state and agricultural preserve, or whether it's a forest conservation easement, those would all have to be taken into account in the future development of the property. So those don't go away.
So that might influence the city not to annex it.
It could. If, you know, I mean, if we looked at something and we saw that 95% of it was an agricultural easement, why would we want it? All right, where are we? There's our example of our master plan. We talked about that. Okay, preliminary and final plats. So the preliminary plat is the subdivision. This may also just be the first step in a process. So not everything, as I said, requires a master plan. You might be hitting the road at your first step being a preliminary plat, and that's going to outline your lot locations and roads. This would be the stage we'd conduct APFO testing if you haven't already under a master plan. The preliminary plan also looks at utility locations. So it's really lot lines, roads, utilities. The final plat for example, a single-family detached unit, you'd go through a preliminary plan, and then you'd do a final plat. And the final plat is the actual recordation document that goes over to the courthouse. It establishes your meets and bounds. As a property owner, that's what you're buying. That is kind of that final surveyed drawing. The final plat process is administrative, so we do that in-house. There's no planning commission involvement at that stage. There's an example of a preliminary plan. Joe told me I was moving too slow. Let's see. I'm like, you know, you wake me up early on Saturday to talk about planning, you're going to get planning. The site plan process, and this is probably the stage where I think most people get engaged, because now there's something tangible coming. There's something I can see. This is going to be a gas station. This is going to be a multifamily building. And so it's something we can all relate to. A lot of these processes up until now are kind of out there. It's hard to envision a master plan and what that means. But the site plan, then you start to go, oh, they're putting light poles right there, and that's where trees are going to be, and that's where their dumpster is going to be. That's kind of the design detail that we're looking at. Once again, if this is the first step in your process, we're looking at APFO again for roads, water, sewer, if it's multifamily for schools. Yeah, absolutely.
At what point does water and sewer get locked in?
So water and sewer allocation occurs at the building permit process. So you get your water to build when you get your building permit.
So you have a finite, the city has a finite number of water and sewer, the county and state, right? From the city.
We have, right.
So I'm thinking like, I'm going to use, I shouldn't be using this, but Summers Farm. And they're looking to build the 68, maybe possible 68 townhouses by Toys R Us, possibility. So could somebody be locked out later on that don't have their building permits not to be able to start building if there's not enough spaces for the sewer and water?
If the question is if you could get to your building permit phase and find, oops, there's no water and sewer. It could theoretically happen, but recall what we've done through the process and through our APFO is to make assumptions about all of the capacity that's needed out there at one time. That, you know, we're going through this water and sewer testing, and we're saying, this is everything we know that's going on out there, and what's going to be needed.
At each stage of the process through the annexation, we know that the property is going to use 100,000 gallons of water, so we deduct that from our allocation. And then once when it starts getting to be a refined number, you know, if they're only going to use 90,000, then we take 90,000 out instead of 100,000. So we refine the number as the plans get more refined through the process.
I was thinking like if two people wanted to, I'm going to use just Summers Farm again, but if somebody else wanted to come into the city with annexation, whoever comes in first gets it?
With the allocation to a certain extent, with it.
Maybe we wouldn't annex a property because we know that we're at capacity, a future capacity, you know, and the future capacity is 20 years out, but, you know, we still take that into account during the annexation process.
There's an example of a site plan. As I said, this is real design details down to kind of the nitty-gritty, landscaping, lighting, building footprint, those sorts of things. Our next slides, we were going to actually just kind of run people through, I think we take for granted that sometimes people know what they're looking at when they pull up a site plan. And we go, oh, don't you see this over here? And I only know because I do it. So just to kind of give you a quick overview of, what you would see on a site plan. And this is actually in your packet because it's a little grayed out. So you can, kind of look at it either now or later. But this is kind of just a standardized site plan and information that would be useful if you picked one of these up. We're always going to have a title block that's going to tell you the name of the project. More importantly, that's going to tell you the case number. So if you have questions about this application, you see this PC 19 blah, 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 blah number, that helps me and my staff to immediately identify what you're talking about. So that's very useful information. It'll also have information on who the engineer is and a general location of the property. A vicinity map, that along with your north arrow are things that are going to help you orient to where we are talking about in the world. The plan will also label major roadways. They'll label the comprehensive plan designation of the road, so maybe it's considered a local road or a collector road, as well as the amount of right-of-way that's there. And then we circled the first 4 notes because those are kind of like the quick reference. There are a lot of notes on plans. They'll tell you about minimum parking standards, landscaping standards, how much open space must be on the plan, those sorts of things. But the first couple of notes are basically going to tell you the zoning and what's proposed. So that's always helpful information. Key components, we're going to have building footprints, parking, loading, utility locations, stormwater management, just kind of an interesting, and I don't know as much about stormwater management as, I was going to say I'd like to, but I don't even know that I'd really like to. But the stormwater management, I think a lot of people picture big retention ponds, sometimes you see off of the highways and things like that. On our local level and through the state, we've really gotten away from individual large retention areas for development of sites. The new regulations require ESD, which is environmental site design. So you're basically supposed to be treating your capacity and the quantity and quality through the way you actually design the site. So now we see more bioretention ponds or bioretention facilities, smaller, you might be in a parking lot and see a grassy little wetlandy looking area. That would be an ESD. So they're kind of spaced throughout the site a little bit more. And in some cases, I've seen some actually really attractive ESD features. So some people will suggest that they actually get away from more compact design development because they are spaced throughout a site and kind of eat up into being able to be compact. But the next 2 steps, improvement plans and building permits, these are totally administrative in nature. So these are not things that would be coming from before the Planning Commission. There's no public comment period. Improvement plans are the construction drawings. They go through our engineering department as the lead agency on those. They do require some state approvals for soil conservation and the like. Sorry. And I would just note that with improvement plans, part of that process, once improvement plans are approved, and this goes back to the question about how do we make sure that somebody actually builds what they said they're going to build and that it all gets implemented. Through that improvement plan process, developers are required to enter into public works agreements with the city and place financial bonds for the construction of public improvements. When we go out and inspect that road that you built and we say, yes, you built it to our standard, that's when we release that bond and it's done and we accept that public infrastructure. That's an example of an improvement plan. They're, as I said, very detailed construction drawings. The planning department reviews improvement plans as we do building permits, because all along we're looking for that preliminary plan that we reviewed and approved, and we're making sure that it's consistent through its implementation. Building permits, they're required for a lot of stuff. Everything from big new construction down to your fence or your shed at your house. The building department's the lead agency on this. Once again, planning reviews as an agency. Just an interesting thing to note, if you are looking to construct a fence or shed or something at your home, we do a one-stop permitting process, and that's Tuesdays from 8 to 11. So you can go in and get same-day permitting. You walk your permit through all the different review agencies and leave that day with the permit. So it's a pretty convenient service. There is some information on our website if you're interested. That's what a building permit looks like, fairly straightforward. Then just to touch more quickly on two of our other reviewing commissions. Our Historic Preservation Commission, they do meet the second and fourth Thursday of every month. The meetings start at 6. They hold a regular meeting, but also a workshop. The members here are also like the Planning Commission. They're appointed by the mayor and board, and they do serve for a 3-year term. There are 7 voting members, including an alternate, and are supported by an aldermanic liaison. Alderwoman Kazemchek sits on the HPC in that capacity. This is interestingly the only commission that actually the city charter calls out qualifications for. You have to have at least 2 members that have a professional or academic training in the field of history, architecture, archaeology, anthropology, or similarly related fields. And all members have to have a demonstrated interest or volunteer experience in that. The Planning Commission that we just talked about, there aren't those same types of qualifications. We do generally get a lot of people with land use experience and interest. That's why they've applied, but there are no qualifications per se. The HPC reviews for consistency with our historic preservation guidelines. One just important thing to keep in mind, we all think of the historic district, and we think of that as our only historic district, and we think of the historic district guidelines as only being the downtown. We do have individual sites designated with historic preservation overlays, and there are small district standards. So it might be outside of that downtown. An example is 401 Linden, which back behind the Red Horse, there is an individual property that's been designated, and so changes to the exterior of that structure would have to go through the historic preservation overlay for consistency with the guidelines. So not just the downtown, there are other structures that are historically significant throughout the city. On the city's website, just out of time instead of running through this, if you have questions about what requires approval, what requires administrative approval, and what has to go to the Historic Preservation Commission, we do have those resources out there, and you can always contact the planning department if you have questions. We do also have a demo review process that the Historic Preservation Commission oversees or initiates. This is for structures that are outside of the historic preservation overlay. It gives the city basically an opportunity before either the complete demolition or partial demolition of a structure to determine if it has potential for significance and if it's something we should protect. So the initial application for demolition kind of triggers this process through which we determine if something's significant and then whether a preservation overlay should be placed on it. And that applies to any structure 50 years of age or older. Then on to our Zoning Board of Appeals. I work with their Board of Appeals. That's a 5-member group with 1 alternate. They meet the 4th Tuesday of every month. They serve terms for 3 years. They review requests for variances, which a variance would be if you had some sort of special condition that you could not meet the side setback and you wanted to put an addition on your property. So they're variances to the bulk and dimensional standards of the zoning district. The variances are very difficult to get. I think sometimes people go, oh, well, I'll apply for a variance. I'm like, no, you have to have a really good reason to apply for a variance. There are state, basically our local ordinance reflects state standards for what you need to demonstrate a variance, and there has to be a unique hardship and specific circumstances to the property that result in a hardship. They also review conditional uses. Example of a conditional use I always like to think about is restaurants with entertainment. It's a use that we've decided that if it is not held to a little more detailed analysis and contextual review, that it could potentially create nuisance activity. So it gives the city to review something, the opportunity to review something and say, okay, does this use in this neighborhood, in this area, require additional conditions to protect public life, safety, health and well-being, all that good stuff. And then they also have some authority with regards to non-conforming uses, which are things that don't meet the current standards, but were developed under prior regulations, and administrative appeals. So if the planning department were to make a determination about something, there is a right to appeal that determination to the Board of Appeals. They also can review appeals to decisions under our adequate public facilities ordinance and our archaeological requirements too, which is kind of interesting. And that's all I had to say.
Yes, it is. Well, anyway, as you can tell, starting with the beginning of the process, just going back a slide, people think There you go. If you start with a master plan and get all the way down to a building permit, you're talking probably a 3-year period to get that first house in the ground. So, you know, if you have a development coming right next door to you for 100 houses, once when they start the planning process, it's a 3-year process. And then they have 2 years before they even submit a plan to us. So it's a 5-year process for the developers. You may think it comes overnight, but it has to go through this long process. So with that, another great quote, cities are something for everyone, and that's why you're here, so you can figure out how to get involved. And if everyone's not involved, it really lacks something. It lacks that something that makes everybody think, wow, this is where I want to live. So part of this discussion is about getting the public involved. And as Gabrielle mentioned, we have our new public notice signs, and the public notice signs are really bright and colorful. Our old ones were black and white. They were cardboard and they fell apart after the first rain or in a heavier windstorm. These are more like realtor signs. They're a heavier quality. They're waterproof. Interestingly enough, down the bottom right-hand corner is a QR code. The QR code is technology from 10, 15 years ago, but it's still very useful. And we'll get to that in just a minute. If you have a smartphone, typically the Apples automatically do it, but if you have an Android, you can download an app, and we'll explain that in just a minute. And then with the signs, there's minimum information, but like I said, when you drive by, you can see that this is the Zoning Board of Appeals because it's a bright red, and there is a Z on it. It tells you the meeting date, it tells you the case number, and really that's all the information, and then our contact information at the bottom. And that's the beginning of the information that you need. And then if you don't have a QR code, what you can do, we're gonna see if technology really works for us here in just a minute. You can go to our database. If you take the picture of the QR code, where's my pointer? There it is. The QR code will take you on your smartphone. I guess all phones are smart now. It'll take you to this page right here. And come on, work for me. Technology is wonderful when it does work. So it'll take you to this page. Let me get you all the way down to the bottom. And if you click here, the interesting thing about this, so these are all the different kinds of signs we have out in the public. And so if you just drove by and you saw a bright blue P, you would come here and click on the bright blue P, which is for Planning Commission, of course. And then it brings you to this map. And these are all the active cases we have in the city that are going to the Planning Commission, okay? So I'm just picking one at random and hoping it works. We want to view the plan. And so it takes us and it tells us it's in Sycamore Ridge. It gives us the case number. And then if we come over here, it tells us that Sherry is the case planner. It has her phone number. It has the status of it. It's pending. It's going through the process. And then you can actually click on this PDF and it will pull up the plan for you, which is very helpful because, like I said, you can do it on your smartphone and it's a little hard to view the plans, and you can actually go through and before you call Sherry and ask what the heck's going on, you can say, oh, look, this is for a large site plan, mostly single family houses up here. Looks like townhouses over here and here. There's floodplain going up the middle. And if you start reading the notes, you can find out more and more. So this is our attempt to help answer some questions before you actually get to our planners. And if you can't find the answer that you want, we will help you walk through the process. And surprisingly, I've seen people actually use this, and it does my heart well, knowing that it does work. So these are a couple of different ways you can get involved. Also, we are required to take all the plans going to the Planning Commission to the neighborhood advisory councils. I laugh because typically the neighborhood advisory councils are planning and the police department. The police give their reports, we give our reports, and we probably take up half the meeting time for the neighborhood advisory councils. We have Channel 99, which we're on right now. You can view all the meetings live, and I have listened to meetings on my phone when I'm driving. So that's very helpful. And then also, lastly, you can call the planner on call, and our generic number is 600-1499. So with all those different avenues, and all the different meeting opportunities that we have, those are the ways that you can find out additional information of what's going on in your neighborhood. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad it works. Yeah, and it is a great thing because I mean, even if you're just curious, you know, because whenever there's an open house, you go to your neighbor's house just to see what's inside their house. I mean, you know, you can just take a quick picture and say, oh, this is just a site plan for, you know, they're building 2 houses out there, and be done with it and satisfy your curiosity. So, in the end, and again, Paul Bear. This is one of my favorite quotes, and he truly believed this. He had a plan every Sunday or Saturday for his football team, and most people don't follow the plans. And as planners, that's our goal, is to follow plans. So with that, we're going to take a short 5-minute break. We have a great project for you all to work on. We need a few minutes to set it up, so if you need bathroom cookies, water, anything, feel free, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Everyone's not here. There we go. We're going to work on a group project, and we're going to spend about 10 minutes on it, and then we're going to report back and compare the two projects. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the East Street Corridor, which is a small area plan. It's approximately 300 acres, I believe, and it basically runs from the interchange down here at by Costco all the way up to Monocacy Village Park. This plan divided it into 3 sections. So what you're going to do, basically, split down the middle. So I'm going to go to this table. We're not going to count off by twos because I always get confused with that. We are going to redevelop the corridor, and we're going to use Lego blocks. So it's 400 acres. Some of the ground rules is it's a group process. We got to be mindful of others, build consensus. It's 400 acres. You can redevelop sites. You can redevelop underutilized properties. Gabrielle and I will float between the 2 tables to give you ideas of how big these properties actually are. Each block on the map is approximately an acre. And so red bricks, they are 75 units to the acre. The closest thing we have to that in the city of Frederick is the old FSK Hotel, the Homewood building at the corner of, right across from Crab Apples. That's about 60 units to an acre. They have to be placed too high because they are tall buildings. The blue bricks, they represent mixed use, and mixed use can be either 1 or 2 blocks, and there's sheets up here to help guide you. And then all other bricks can only be 1 block high. So we have orange bricks that represent townhouses, and that's about 15 units to the acre. And so if you think about 15 units to the acre, if you walk along 2nd or 3rd Street, 15 units to the acre. That's what a townhouse development looks like. Yellow blocks, they represent about 8 units to the acre. This is your traditional single-family neighborhood. If you think Fredericktown Village, single families, Whittier single families, go out to the west. I'm trying to think what's out there. Thank you, Taskerchance. That's about 8 units to the acre. Thank you, mind blank. So some of the rules are there's only, it's a large area you're dealing with, but you have to use at least 15 orange blocks, which are the townhouse blocks, which would mimic downtown. And then you also have to use at least 10 yellow blocks, which are the single family blocks. Other than that, there are no real rules. You can place them wherever you want. The grid on the map is to give you guidance. It's not absolutes. If you need help locating things or pointing out landmarks, that's what we're here for. So if you all want to come up and take whatever side of the room you're on, we'll give you about 10 minutes to work through this. And then after that, we'll compare the 2. There are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, so here's your sheets. Here's your blocks. And basically, you're trying to redevelop the area to the bottom of the map. The Frederick Brickworks down here, that's about 40 acres, just to give you an idea. And then this area up here, which is the hospital site, is about 20 acres. So have at it. Figure out what you want to do. The obvious place to start redevelopment is along the Brickworks and the highway corridor down here, but you can go all the way up to East Street. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, you have been talking about this for 15 minutes.
We haven't done too well.
Yep. And so this is our job on a daily basis of trying to figure out how to put things and where to put them in the relationships. So first, I would like to thank you all for taking the time and participating in this. And again, I think the Lego exercise just demonstrates the process that not only planning staff, but the planning commission and the mayor and board all go through to, create things in the neighborhood and create them in a cohesive fashion. If you have time, take a look at the other table. Also, in the back of your folder on the right-hand side, last page, there is a 4-question survey of what we did right, what we did wrong, what you would like to see us do in the future, maybe just do the Lego exercise for a 2-hour period, which I think would be really fun. But if you could just fill that out real brief so we know if there's topics you want us to talk about. We're thinking about taking this out to some of the NACs, so maybe we'll get it out there, help other people so they don't have to take up a Saturday. Any suggestions would be welcome. So again, thank you for coming out on a Saturday. There's a survey, if you could fill that out. Also in your folder, Gabrielle and I put our cards in there. If you have questions about anything, we probably can at least direct you to the right person or give you the answers. Again, thanks for coming out on a beautiful Saturday. Yep.